An aggro or rush deck is a deck that takes an aggressive approach of dealing damage to the opponent as quickly as possible, generally through the use of a large number of low-value units. Aggro decks have been present in all forms of card games, and aggression strategies exist in all types of games. The main game plan being to hit your opponent in the mouth as fast as possible is as straightforward as it sounds. While I would sit here and explain the history of Rush in Vanguard, I will provide a Team Absolution video which dissects the history of Rush. They can explain it a lot better than I would. When creating a Rush deck in the earlier days of Vanguard, you would want 8k vanillas, 8k units via skills, units with extra power usually, 10k attackers or greater, but overall efficient units. Something that can come out to be useful beyond the initial turn that it is played. Taking a look at Orphist again, within the set 1 format, I play extra copies of the grade 1 and 2 ride line so that I can create extra attackers that ask for shields from my opponent. This allows us to create magic numbers against our opponent when set up correctly to push for damage, or to take away pieces from their hand. When I was in the city on Saturday at Fordham Comics again, I fought a Barra Magnus player, and I won 2-0 in less than 10 minutes because he couldn't drop cards from his hand without losing his combo pieces for him to soul charge to 15 for his turn 3. He was entering turn 3 at 4 damage and had no choice but to no guard my Vanguard during my first grade 3 turn. He left the door wide open. Luckily I checked the crit and I closed the game. It is important to note that defensive triggers will cripple your rush play unless you establish columns that can hit over defensives. This is why you want to attack lowest number to highest number to bait your opponent into guarding efficiently. In Vanguard, you guard when it's cheap. That's how you can maintain card economy over your opponent in a regular game. When attacking, you want to poke your opponent. Poking is attacking with a unit that asks for 1 card guard, usually 5k shield. Incrementally, those cards will create a large advantage for you by the end of the game. If your opponent drops 1 card a turn for each attacking unit for 3 turns, you have just created a 2 card advantage over your opponent. When you play the initial card and choose to attack with it, if they drop 1 card to guard, that is equal. If turn 2 you continue to do so and they drop 1 card, that is a net positive 1, and continuing, that is a net positive of 2 in terms of card economy over your opponent. That is 3 cards with the value that that 1 card has given you. If you choose to add another attacker, the same idea applies. You're gaining card economy over your opponent and created 2 to 4 cards worth of card economy over your opponent with 1 attacker. If they choose not to guard, then their damage count increases. So this is mainly what I'm talking about. These are your most valuable targets. Bubble Mine you can throw down, use as a side attacker to poke. Turn 2 you can give it 5k off of your grade 2 so that this can still reach into grade 2s. And if you really are desperate, you can throw this down as an attacker, but unfortunately you'll need to call over this late game if you make your shadow tokens or just end up with an awkward board state. But primarily you want to set up your front row like this, turn 2, and you want to attack rear, then van. The reason being is that this asks for 5k shield, this also asks for 5k shield, and then this center line can only be guarded successfully if they use a 15k shield. Now an alternative, if you really want to, is you can attack rear first and then swing with Vanguard. Unfortunately, you're subjecting yourself to trigger variance, excluding if they hit a defensive. And yes, if you're good players, then you check the trigger, you allocate the power to the other side, and then you're able to swing in, which will require them to guard with another 15k shield. But the purposes of 888 is to take away as many cards from your opponent as possible, or to deal as much damage to them as possible. So to aid with minimizing variance, you do want to swing rear, van. Overall, if we look at it, this will be asking for a 5k shield, this will be asking for a 5k shield, and this will be asking for a 15k shield in total. So when going to grade 2, you're going to use your world order ideally, and you're going to give 5k to a unit. Now, since these are 10k attackers, if you want to again, you can give the 5k to the Vanguard. This is 15 into an 8 is a 23 if they drop the 15k shield, which means 1 trigger to pass again, which allows you to push for more damage. If you want to give the 5k to a side, this becomes a 15. Now, if it is a 15 into their 8 or 10, that requires a 10k shield or greater, and since 10k shields don't exist in Overdress without special skills right now, you're able to ask for a offensive trigger or more than one card from your opponent's hand. Otherwise, they'll just take the damage. But once again, for the turn 2 play, you can swing rear, then Vanguard if you're asking for a poke, and then a swing, which all that means is that you're asking for your 5k shields on pokes, and then you're asking for a offensive trigger or a no guard again on your center line. Although since you are on grade 2 and you're able to establish better lines, if you want to, you can establish a 20k column and 10-10. You could do something like this if you open up very well, but unfortunately, if you're going to use your shadow tokens turn 3 or beyond, you're going to call to the back row since this can establish 30k lines, and you want to create the 2 card guards for your opponent. You have multiple variations if you want to swing for something that can either break a 15k shield or break over a defensive trigger, just to ask for more shield value from your opponent. If you swing into something like this, then yes, you go for a 5k, depending on where you choose to allocate the 5k power from your skill. This is just a 5k shield. Swinging in for 20, the center line, you have threat of being able to allocate a trigger, especially if you do check a crit. Since you can put the crit power, you're going to deal the 2 damage. This becomes a 30k line, which is once again asking for 2 cards from your opponent. Moving into turn 3, when you're finally on Orphist and you use your second order, this is what I'm talking about. If you choose to use the skill, you're going to lose cards since you're then calling over. This is very good board state since this is a 15k attacker. This creates 30k lines, so without Persona Ride, you're asking for 2 card guards. Now that you are stabilized on grade 3, since you have 2 card guards across the board, depending on their damage count, you can choose how you wish to swing. If your opponent's at 3 damage, then you can swing side, either bait them into eating the damage, pushing them at 4, so you can swing for the Vanguard line, or if they choose to eat this, then once again, you can swing in. If you check the crits, then you can choose to either crit to Van, so that you can push them to 5, or you can put the crit to the side. Since they will eat this, go to 4, and then you can pressure more shield value out of them with this, since this is lethal, and if you want to damage deny them, you're able to do so if the situation calls for it. Now that we've established how to rush, let's ask the question, how do we counter rush? Now, before you can get to your attacking turn, you do need to guard. And if your opponent sets up 3 pokes, let's say turn 2 they set up 888. Depending on the cards in your hand, you enter a situation where you can guard with 5ks for the sidelines, eat Van, or you can eat sides, attempt to bank for defense triggers, make them have a 1 to pass for the Van, or you use the 15k shield for the Vanguard line itself. If they enter the situation where they attack with the side first, you can give them the 5k. They do the other side, you can choose to give them another 5k if you can afford it. They swing a center line, you could choose to no guard it. Depending on how much damage you want to take, depending on the cards in hand that you want to conserve, is how you will guard. But a general idea is that if they're just swinging like this, you can guard the sides and eat Van. You do have the possibility of taking 2 damage if they do hit the crit, but this is more dependent on the cards that you have in your hand. As for countering, what you can do is you will need to dedicate 1 or 2 turns to attacking into rear guards. Typically 1 is good enough, since that will set them behind in tempo. If they choose to let the rear guards die, they won't hold the same amount of offensive pressure if they don't have the cards in hand. But usually, depending on how they guard for the rears, will give a very big tell on the cards that they have in their hand, and it will telegraph what their turn 3 play will look like. So what you can do is you could attack with Vanguard into a sideline, and they enter a situation where they either can drop an offensive trigger to guard for this, or they're going to let it die. If they let it die, it is more than likely that they either don't care for the rear guard or they have a replacement for it. And then when you're in the situation, you can have your side attack into the rear. Either they will let it die, or if they don't, then you can have the last side go into it, whether they guard it or not. With this, you're putting them in a situation where they need to consider if they're going to even receive a point of damage. Because if you swing V to R, R to R, and they let this die, the last attack will go to Vanguard if you choose that. If you do not, they choose to guard for this for whatever reason, then you can swing the last into, and they don't have counterblasts for their turn 2 play or turn 3 play, depending on if they used that one counterblast turn 2. Overall, you just want to swing into the sides, and you have to dedicate one turn into it. There was a game that I played at Fordham Comics where my opponent completely hand to board and he had nothing in hand. At that moment, I saw a potential winning opportunity because as long as I cleared the front row, I then knew what his hand would be based upon drive checks / drawing, since he would communicate to me if it was a trigger by keeping it in his hand, or a grade 3 if it was his Persona ride. Before I close out the video, let's just review the point of this video. Rushing is a strategy to hit your opponent in the mouth as fast as possible until they fall over. However, you achieve this by calling units that can ask your opponent for shield. You are trading card for card with your opponent. You attack with a card and they lose a card or take a damage, speeding up the process for your turns 3 and 4 to be much more pressuring to your opponent than they would be if they were at a lower damage count. The ways to counter rush are to keep a trigger in your hand during your opening mulligan so you can guard, or you can dedicate a turn to attack their front row so they begin to lose tempo and have to commit more cards from their hand onto the board. Lowering their hand size through card economy, you can overpower them and gain control of the game. Defensive triggers can slow down an aggressive turn and make things much easier to manage. Overall, rushing is a effective tactic to gain tempo, but can easily be exploited with proper guarding, attacks, attacking rears, or defensive triggers. This has been Mario. Thanks for watching.